the Within Orb podcast. Come get Within Orb. Hello, my name is Jenn Zahrt, and welcome to Within Orb, a production of the Celestial Arts Education Library, a podcast bringing people together around the love of astrology, books. Join me as I interview people about the astrology books that changed their life and practice. You can support the podcast at withinorb.com. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Within Orb, and I am honored today to be talking to Maeg, beaming in from Salem, Massachusetts, writer, astrologer, herbalist extraordinaire. Maeg, how are you today?
I'm doing great. How are you, Jen?
I'm doing well. So let's just jump right in. I would love to know, what is the first astrology book that just made you aware that there is a thing here with star stuff?
So most of my early experience of astrology, like starting to dig into it, was like blogs and cafeastrology.com and all this stuff. And I was very online. I don't even think it occurred to me that there were books. Because like when I would go into stores, I didn't see anything that looked like real. But then I went into some kind of used bookstore and I saw this and I had to get it. It's Lesbian Love Signs, an astrological guide for women loving women by someone called Aurora.
Mm-hmm.
And what stood out to me about it is, you start with, here's a description of Taurus women, and then it will be like Taurus loving Taurus. So it's very sun sign oriented, but it got me thinking about synastry, which is not something that I really practice now, but the idea of like, okay, so this was like a long journey for me from astrology is a really cool personality test to like, this is useful in life. And one of the things I was thinking about with my partner, I knew a little bit more about my chart than because of the blogs, than just my sun sign and my partner's sun sign. And it occurred to me, wait a second, I have a Mercury in Gemini and you have a moon in Gemini. So part of my delineation at the time of that was when I'm doing Geminiing externally, you're feeling it internally. So that's why you love me, but it's a little overwhelming sometimes. And that like blew the doors open for me because it actually really changed how we interacted with each other. Like I felt a lot more understanding of like what their inner landscape was like and how it actually, we had something in common that I didn't know about, but it showed up in this really different way. And so thank you, Aurora.
Thank you, Aurora.
It just became like, wait a second, this is more. And it was even more than that and more than that and more than that. But it was like one of the stepping stones to astrology having a huge role in my life versus it just being one more typology thing in the typology obsessive toolkit that I had.
Right. Well, it sounds like that lived experience of establishing a new baseline for understanding your partner was the breakthrough moment.
Yeah. It was like, I even remember exactly where we were on our walk home when it like pinged for me. And this was a decade ago. I didn't even know about timing or prediction then. Like I knew that there were like horoscopes and things, but I didn't understand how it worked. I was just finding out that houses were a thing. Like that's where I was in my process.
Sure.
Yeah.
But even when you get those archetypes and the sun sign typologies and you realize, oh, I have a Taurus sun and there's going to be a couple signs that I just don't get.
Yeah.
You just have to realize there's a whole spectrum of behavior that will not be your expression, but that do exist that we can't really get rid of. I found that when you get into astrology as a younger person, like pre-20, you were before the age of 20, perhaps?
Yeah, I was 20, about 20.
Around that age, yeah, exactly. So you're realizing like you're getting out into the world and you're kind of still wanting to shape it in your own image, I find, before that time. And you realize like, I can't. Astrology basically bops you on the head and says, nope, other people are like they are and you're like the way you are. And that's the way it is.
That's one of the things that I would tell people when it was just beginning to take over my life, was my argument for why it mattered. I was still very in a, well, it's not real, but it's a helpful tool, this kind of thing. Silly Meg. But yeah. I remember telling people, we all say, I know everyone's different, but like when we interact in the world, most of our reaction is like, why isn't this person behaving the way I would handle the situation?
Right.
And it is really helpful to see the various permutations and have more words for it than like it's different than what I would do. And it helps a little bit with value judgment sometimes. I think it adds some generosity.
Yeah, right. Exactly. I think it adds tolerance, it adds generosity, and also an acknowledgement of no one's at fault if there's an incompatibility of action or in a situation and one person is responding maybe slower than the other or is louder than the other. It goes, this is simply not compatible. It's not a problem with you or me. It's just like fire and water, literally. It's going to do what it does. And if we see that and go, oh, that's doing what that does, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And then one can choose to engage at that point saying, okay, I'm going to overcome my own resistances, or I'm going to walk away and say, thank you for playing. I love you. Wish you well on your game. I'm going to go play over here. That kind of thing. So
the other thing that I noticed, because if it's sun sign astrology, my partner and I are both Tauruses.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the online stuff was, oh no, don't do that. It was the funny thing of like, you want to be different, but the right kind of different. If it's the same, it's almost as bad as having like the bad synastry of two signs that like would really butt heads. And this was kind of like, you're going to bore each other. You're going to all want the same things. And it's like, there's no friction.
You're going to fight over the food.
Right. And what I really liked about Aurora is that there was a lot more nuance around the two signs being the same and like what you would be able to really innately understand about each other's preferences and how like sexy and enjoyable that can be. And also the lack of friction could be that there's no one with Tauruses, for example, to like push out of the comfort zone. There's no one to sort of like throw dynamite into the routine. And of course, it's more complicated than that because we're not only our sun signs, but that was another thing I thought was really interesting was like thinking about, okay, so really, really different can be a problem, but also sameness has its benefits and also its own challenges, I suppose I would say. So, I mean, now it sounds really obvious, but at the time it was like a whole new world.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad Aurora could dawn upon you, the craft of astrology. Yes. Okay. So I want to know what books have truly shaped you as a practitioner and which ones you would hold tight to the extent of traipsing off into a very secluded place in this earth and only getting to have those by your side.
Yeah, like if there, God forbid, was a fire and I had to run out with only 3 books.
We can go there, sure. Uranus is transiting Taurus right now. You can do the escape in a fire thing.
Yeah, I would be so sad if I lost my copy of Babylonian Star-lore. For me, I always start with this book before I write pretty much anything about astrology. And part of that is because I feel like a lot of things that don't click for me will click differently with this pantheon of deities and also like the way the constellations were operating with agriculture, with like the way people were thinking about star omens. And it just always unlocks something that jumping right into, say, Hellenistic astrology doesn't always unlock for me, even though that is where my heart lies. That's where most of my techniques live. I find that going to this book really, really helped. And for me, a big breakthrough that I had in my own work somewhat recently, I do a lot of, as an herbalist who's also an astrologer, I do a lot of plant and planet devotion work where I'm thinking about what plants love the planets or the stars and vice versa, what these relationships are, because for me, I always want to bring the stars here. Like they can't get close enough. And so getting to like drink rose tea and feel Venus there, or to tend to my catnip plant and feel Mercury is like, oh, this is Taurus stuff. It's like visceral. It's nice. And so I was working on a piece about basil, and I was trying to figure out like, who is this plant? This is so weird. It's supposed to be ruled by Mars. That makes a lot of sense. But it was only in looking at Babylonian Star-lore and learning that, oh, actually, I can find it for you. Okay. The scorpion, as in the constellation, is in its entirety attributed to the multifaceted goddess Ishara. And I was like, wait a second. There's an entire goddess that is associated with Scorpio. Like, tell me more. And she is about war and divination and oaths and marriage and fertility. And I was getting really tired of a lot of the words I was using to describe Scorpio, like intense, cathartic. I had all these like keywords that felt kind of, several years into my practice, just felt kind of like tired of hearing myself say it. To be able to like pull in myth and storytelling and get new language when you've been saying the same stuff over and over again, just it brings it all in. And then it also, for me with basil, I was like, yeah, basil to me feels like this blade of presence. It helped me understand the Scorpio Taurus axis differently as this like edge between the feeling of going into battle, that kind of presence, and then like the fertility and fecundity presence of like abundance and presence. And I was just like, thank you, Gavin White. Speaking of, thanking Aurora and now thanking Gavin White. It's just so juicy, and it really brings so much more evocative imagery and like ties us to some of the really old. I think that old things aren't inherently good because they're old, but they do have this Saturnian collecting over time that is so valuable. So that's my long answer.
I love a long answer. The fixed stars are always there for the plants at night. They see them all the time in ways that we don't remember or think about, right? Because we're not out at night looking at them that way for hours every night, like a tree has to.
I think that plants are such incredible teachers of astrology. And I think what you just described is so much of why. Like they also have been, accepting the rays from the sublunar realm for so long. They're like really good at this. They're good at being talismanic bodies, and they can teach us how to also be better talismanic bodies, I think.
But also the slowness of looking like that idea of just, they know when to open, unfurl, retract, go down, come back up. What's been your experience? Have you spent time in cities versus rural areas to kind of track these plant behaviors through the year?
I have lived almost entirely in cities, and now I live in Salem. So I live in a bustling town, I suppose.
Yeah.
And I think that while I do escape into more, I struggle to say like, it's not more nature, like everything is nature, like we are nature. But I do escape into places that feel more stereotypically like into the woods, into the wild. But honestly, it's everywhere. Like there's a hemlock tree that I'm looking at right now who teaches me about the stars all the time. I think part of it is not just that they seem to fully accept the rhythms that we fight against. And also, I think like the overculture makes that really, really challenging for us as well. But I also think that it's good practice communicating with the other than human world. And it's a little bit easier for some people, not everybody, to start with plants versus something that feels so, so far away. For other people, it's the reverse. I work with people all the time who have no issue communicating with stars and planets, but really struggle to like sit with a cup of tea and like be with that plant. Yeah. And other people who are lifelong herbalists who are just getting into astrology and are like, I don't understand. It feels so abstract. Like I can't taste, touch, feel this planet. And I'm like, but you can actually. And so then we do that work of bridging depending on where people are starting from. But yeah.
Wow.
But I don't think it matters if you're in a city or not. I think the dandelions that are popping out of the sidewalk are just as much Jupiter teachers as they would be in a meadow. So if not more so, frankly.
I love how we've gone from Babylonian Star-lore a la Gavin White straight into plant magic, I'm going to call it, and herbalism and astro-herbalism. That's amazing. I'm just thinking about all the times that I've had that moment of when we think about proximity, there's a plant right in front of you and you can make a relationship with that one. And remembering times when I've been awake at night under the canopy of stars and having a direct experience of something that is that far away, seemingly right next to me. Where that bridge is actually now turned into like nanoscopic because it's like, hello, Jen. I'm on the horizon, but I'm in your eyeball,
Yes. Yeah. I've been going for walks at night where like the only stars that I can really see because it's not dark enough yet are either Vega or Arcturus. And those stars will make you aware of them. Like it is not an option. And they do not feel that far away. No. And I think that that's partly how powerful they are and how long they have been talking to our human selves and our ancestors, but also in a way they are here because we're here. Like it's this strange fractal mirroring thing that is, I do not understand and don't expect to, but that's the mystery.
But understanding and knowing are slightly different, right?
Yes.
So you know it. It's there. I feel like I can feel it inside your consciousness, for lack of a better word. It's like you're transmitting this beautiful relationship just with these words. I hope everyone listening can feel this. It's pretty cool. So, we're deeping back into the bag of books. What other books do you have?
Okay, well, we've been talking about the power of words and Manilius forever and always. Manilius came to me through Twitter because people would just like quote various ancient astrologers in my little bubble of astrology pals. And every time that I would read something and go, oh my God, it was always Manilius every single time. I'm like, once that happens enough times, you got to buy the book.
Yeah, right.
You know? And I love what a weirdo he is. Like, he diverges from the tradition all the time. One of my favorite things that I flagged for today is his own idea of the guardians of the signs.
Mm-hmm.
He says Minerva is the guardian of Aries, Venus of Taurus, so we're in agreement there, Apollo for Gemini, Mercury for Cancer. That one, I have questions. Jupiter for Leo, Demeter for Virgo, Vulcan for Libra, Scorpio, Mars. So, okay. Diana, Sagittarius, Vesta, Capricorn, Juno, Aquarius, and Neptune for Pisces, which the modern astrologers will appreciate. So, like, Manilius, what are you totally off script? What's going on?
Right.
But I also love it. It's great.
I mean, it's like he's saying, hey, you guys have your tradition, but let's go in and see it from this angle. Here's what I got to say about it, you know?
Yeah. And I think sometimes with traditional astrology, which is primarily what I practice, there is this feeling of like, kind of like the Babylonian Star-lore, like, let's go back as far as possible for the real stuff. And let's try to recreate it. And let's get as true to it as possible. Let's get the best translation. And I think that's beautiful. And also, if we're trying to emulate the ancients, we should be making stuff up and testing it all the time, because that's what they were doing.
No, for real. And also that what you articulated around the going back and getting to the right way, or the first way being better than how it developed later, that's kind of a reverse positivism, as opposed to a celebration of, well, this culture did it this way, and now this culture did it this way, and now this culture had this other cultural frame, and so we practice things this way. And to play with the multiplicity of, you know, it's from the beginning made up.
Yeah.
I mean, let's face it.
Totally. And I also think like it can be an overcorrection to something else that's not great, which is just lifting whatever and not caring about the context or the history or wanting to know about the people that it comes from. Like that can be a problem too, but we can kind of steer in a way that's like a little bit purity oriented. And I think that that gets uncomfortable and sticky and isn't like of the spirit of the thing that you're trying to do, which is if you're thinking like, I really admire these astrologers and they were doing such incredible work, then I think if you take some of their inventiveness and their willingness to be wacky and do something different, like, and just like stand by it and, you know, I don't even know if he explains it. I don't think he explains it. But it immediately like takes my imagination somewhere really exciting to imagine Diana as the guardian or ruler of Sagittarius, like the bow and arrow, beautiful, like the wild of it, you know, it's like, oh, I just have chills. It's wonderful. And I won't like abandon Jupiter. I still buy that, but like.
Right. But it also brings a maternal quality to Sagittarius that is never talked about in a modern context. Mm-hmm. It's always the adventurer you can never actually snag down, and ignoring some of that. I don't know. It's a more sort of quality of like, yeah, the feminine that's attached to it. Because you always have this depiction of it being like a masculine torso on a horse body. And it's like, why? Why not Diana? Why not something else?
Yeah. And we have so many versions of like the wild hunter who is femme, like this kind of like this, and Artemis in terms of like a maternal side, it's such a weird mix because the first thing she did when she came out of her mother was help Apollo come out. You know, she was like helping with childbirth immediately, but then insisted on being a virgin, like being complete in and of herself in this way and demanding that kind of life for herself. So it's a really interesting mix of like what she stewards in the world and what that offers Sagittarius. And like we could do this with every single one of these. Like they're all fascinating. Yeah.
I'm also thinking of when he is saying Vesta is attached to Capricorn, and look at the symbol of Capricorn, goat, fish. You know, there's so many things about the public expression of Capricorn that's very top-facing, goaty, sort of, I'm going to make it on my own or delegate, but I'm up here on the mountaintop. And I'm like, what's going on with that fishtail? What do we not know? What's being kept secret? You know, and if you know enough Capricorns, you're going to know what I'm talking about, because there's always this other side, you know, and if you're on the inner sanctum of that, and Vesta has the public face of, we're going to make sure that society stays fed and healthy. And then you're also not allowed to come to my house because it's only open 1 week a year. And there's a lot of secrets in there. So
I also think about Vesta with like that hearth fire, and then Capricorn being often associated with certain kinds of like metalworking or like what you can forge, which sounds more, it's kind of like the Mars exaltation in Capricorn feeling, but there's something there with these sacred fires that I think is really, really beautiful.
Mm-hmm. And then you have the modern trend where when we did discover outer planets, so many astrologers in the community tried to figure out, do we have a ruler? Is there a sign that this new entity rules, in the same way that you see Manilius remixing here, saying, well, what if? And it seems like in the modern context, people critical of 20th century astrology say, oh, they said that Uranus rules Aquarius, but like, come on, we know. And it's that's not any different than what Manilius is talking about. And we don't talk poorly about him.
Yeah. And I think also with the Uranus stuff, like in my own practice, I don't use the outer planets as rulers of signs. But if someone comes to me and they really understand their Aquarius rising placement, let's say, as really aligning with Uranus, we'll talk about that. Like, I don't think it's wrong just because I don't use it. And I also think it's really fascinating to think about Aquarius with like, okay, let's add in the Saturn stuff, which is going to mess up your mind about who you think Saturn is, which is delicious and wonderful. And it's also like, okay, is there something about Aquarius that gets both of these planets, which seem completely opposed to each other? And is that part of what we're talking about too? Like, I think it's really important to understand foundational technique and all of this stuff. Like, I love getting into the weeds of the specifics and what we're supposed to do and how effective this stuff is. And I love loosey-goosey as well. Lots of imaginative and interesting things happen in the consultation space when you allow things to be a little bit more strange and spirit-led and just see where things are going.
Awesome.
Hello, this is JD Kelley, the host of the AstroMagia conference held online this year from November 16th to November 18th. Find out more about the conference at AstroMagia, AstroMagia.org. AstroMagia seeks together creatives, practitioners, and scholars engaged at the intersection of astrology and magic. Some of this year's notable contributors are Chris Warnock, Dimitri George, Michael Ofek, Dr. Al Cummins, and Alkissis Daimek. The conference has 7 keynotes, over 40 other talks and presentations, art and performance, aimed at all levels of familiarity with astrological magic, its history and practice. Find out more about the conference at our website and also on this year's theme, Astral Sensibilities and Sensualities.
Okay, one more book.
So the other book doesn't exist yet.
An embryo!
Yes, but it's beginning to exist as a Substack that you can subscribe to. It's not mine. It's Kristin Mathis's work on the Orphic Hymns, which I believe Revelore is going to make something I can have in my hands, which is very, very exciting.
Yes.
I actually didn't know for sure that it was Revelore. I was pretty sure, but I texted Kristin last night and was like, remind me so I can talk about it. And I was so glad that it was actually an overlap. But yeah, for me, astrology is so much. I remember taking a walk with my mom and I was just starting my practice. And she was like, okay, so is astrology a religion? I was like, no, it's not at all. And I don't think it is. But she was more right than my like dismissive mind was able to take in at the time, insofar as my spiritual practice is highly astrological and stellar. And so for me, a lot of what I would grab if I could only take a couple of books is about the books that don't make me necessarily better at techniques. They're about ones that make me feel closer to the stars and the planets. And if it was literally a desert island, as much as I would want the ephemeris and to like try to, maybe use some horary, which is something I'm learning, to try to sort out some of what on earth is going on, or to look at like the transits to see when things might improve, or if I should need to just accept my fate. Ultimately, what I most want on a desert island is to look up at the sky and like be with these beings who like have changed my life when I didn't know about them, and now even more so that I do. So Kristin's work on the Orphic Hymns is like, it's a prayer book. It's just so beautiful. And I have other copies of the Orphic Hymns. I wanted them to mean more to me than they did. There was something about them that just felt not all the way here. I can't explain it. And some of them are ones I cherish, or like CAELi Mastros's copy is like more like an adaptation, and they're really like alive and exciting. But Kristin's work marries all of my favorite things, which is like it's highly academic in her background on Mediterranean, like ancient Mediterranean magic practices. It's super relational and animistic. Her whole process is like completely spirit-led. Like it's so spooky. She's getting all these dreams and just being pulled into this work. And it's just, it shows in the writing. It just vibrates. I think even if you're not Christian, but you were raised in a culture that is Christianized and like makes Christianity like the supreme religion, it's really hard to do translation work and not accidentally pull things in that direction. And I think Kristin is doing us such a service by like showing how queer these texts are. Also that they're like way more connected, not just to the gods that the planets are named after and vice versa, but like they're actually astrology manuals. Like they're connected to astrological practice and like the way we look at charts and like it's blowing my mind. So yeah, Kristin's work is the other thing I would want to keep with me for sure.
I love that you're showing how she's engaging with these Orphic hymns in a real context for now and the here and now. And one thing I've always felt about them in other translations and contexts is it felt like playing a role-playing game. Like, this isn't me. This is me pretending to be a magician trying to get to Mars. So I've got to say this thing that Mars likes, but I'm not from this time and place. And so it becomes this almost like very uncomfortable sort of, okay, I'll do this for however many days I need to do to make contact with this entity. And I think to myself, that's not sustainable for who I am. I don't want to say an Orphic hymn that's maybe in poor translation that gets me closer to however they got there. And I feel like there's got to be a better way for us to get there here from here now and not pretend to be ancient Greek and then go forward, you know?
Yeah. And I think what Kristin's doing is it's this very weird time warp where the language sounds more modern, but it's also, she's trying to pull in what they would have meant by it, which is in some ways that kind of like trying to go back to ancient Greece and be accurate. But in doing so, it creates this timelessness. I actually have the Hymn to the Moon up if we want to hear a little bit of it. But there's also just like, I think CAELi Mastros's copy, it does sound modern. Like that is one of the benefits of that one, but it departs more than, I mean, Kristin's is really trying to like sleep right next to the text from the original. So it's so beautiful.
Very cool. Only if she gave us permission.
She did.
Oh, she did? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, then
yeah.
Go for it.
Okay, so I have the Hymn to the Moon, and she says, it starts, attention, goddess queen, illuminator, heavenly moon, crescent moon with the horns like a bull, your run in the night sky, your pasture, the airy clouds, enrobed in night, bearing a torch, moon maiden, you are decked in lucky stars, waxing and waning, feminine and also masculine, gleaming charioteer who loves her horses. You are the mother of time itself, fruit bearer, amber beamed, heavy with sorrow, streaming down light, you give birth. All seeing, wide awake, you burst forth with beautiful stars. You delight in stillness and in night's blessed lot. Radiant joy gifter, perfect ripener, night's votive offering. Star boss, spiral runner with your flowing robes. Girl, you are wise in every way. So come, blessed, cheerful one, you with the lucky stars. Shine your light, be radiant girl. Preserve and renew this one who beseeches you. And there are some things in that hymn that are really strange to me, like the reference to girl, for example. But Kristin has this whole commentary about how the Greek word she's using literally means an unmarried young girl. And it's meant to be, has this very specific word that if translated without that cultural context, you lose some of the intimacy that you change when you make it maiden, which is what a lot of translators do.
Mm-hmm.
If you keep it girl, it feels really odd to us when we're like devoting ourselves to this incredible celestial body, but it's about this sense of closeness and also like how we're envisioning her. Speaking of like Manilius and the Sagittarius and Diana stuff, like these words adjust how we think about the planets, which I do think is a kind of magic itself. So I love when I read something that I think I know and small changes make my brain go, wait a second, what? And then to dive deeper into that and how that like builds relationship. It's just one of my, I guess, really on the nose Virgo rising little detail love things. So
amazing. Yeah. And then when you were reading it out loud too, to hear that, like when I look at the moon next, I'll be like, hey girl, you know?
Yeah.
I'm thinking of it because we think of the moon as embodying a kind of feminine, and there are contexts where the moon is seen as a masculine entity. But then to put the English word girl there is like, oh, I didn't know she was that young. Because
Right?
if you think about the
Yeah.
maternity of the moon and the way it's like milky and caring, feeding, perfect ripener, as Kristin put it. But that's not the same as this other level of development in the human female context.
Yeah, I think it also like makes a little bit of a mess of the somewhat difficult the maiden mother crone thing gives me ick sometimes, and I think that this is a really exciting way to imagine the multifacetedness of the word girl, and like both its casualness and also the age. And I don't want to, I got permission to read the hymns. So I don't want to say too much about the commentary. If anyone is like, this is fascinating, you should go subscribe to Kristin's Substack and keep your eyes peeled for the publication that's forthcoming.
Yeah. Another conversation to be had, perhaps not today, around that concept of attaching the word mother solely to the female experience of those who give human birth versus those who mother who are not that. And maiden presupposes marriage. And so it's like to unpack, well, there are some people who will not do that and they don't need to be virgin in that way. Like there's a whole level of conversation around all of those terms.
Yeah. And Kristin has a very, I think, deft hand when it comes to like all the gender unpacking of these hymns too, which is so needed.
Very cool. Well, thank you for bringing Kristin into this context and also for choosing an unborn book. That hasn't happened yet. So I find that amazing because any library is the precipitation of ideas that came to form. And there are so many that don't. There's an intention for a book, but that doesn't happen. And then there are prolific people. They take up a lot of shelf space next door where you're just like, oh, Noel Till was a good Capricorn. He's got 18 feet of shelf space with all these books. And then there's someone who just has one tiny contribution or, maybe not so tiny like Gavin. I'm not sure what else Gavin White's done, but just this alone is enough. And so you're speaking to somebody who's in the process of creating something, and you yourself are also now co-creating something that's going to become a book as well. So there's all these ways in which we have these thought forms that come from our engagement with the world. And then when do they kind of gain that earthy heaviness to become a text that we can hold that goes beyond the pixelized Substack or the transmission on Twitter? Well, rest in peace, Twitter.
Seriously.
So, yes. That becomes something that then can be immortal. And the immortality is not digital. It has to be printed in ink.
Yeah.
And I think we have to recognize that too, is just in whatever form, whether it's handwritten or printed, but something has to actually be left behind outside of the brain or the hard drive.
That's part of what I talk about with people when I talk about the third house. And it's like strangeness of there are a couple of houses that in our modern time, I feel like don't collect meaning in a way that makes sense to us unless we put it into context. And I think one of those things is why is writing in the third house from a traditional perspective? And it's because it's magic. Because it's magic to have something that was inside of you and have it outside of you, and it can have a life completely of its own that is not actually tethered to your incarnation whatsoever. That is bananas. If the third house is the temple of the moon and is connected to witchcraft, then certainly books are all these beings that emerge. They are different than the more ephemeral internet. I mean, speaking of Twitter, written a lot of threads on Twitter. I got to put them somewhere else. And I've been trying to do that, but it's really different than having something in print. Not that that's a perfect storage always, but it's very different.
Yeah. And if you get a large enough print run, they can't burn all the books.
No. No, and also like there are a lot of really, really great astrology texts that you can get digitally online.
Mm-hmm.
I need them in my hands. Like there's something, and not everyone is this way. And I know it's personal, but like I need to hold the book and I need to mark it up in my own way, usually with pencil, because I get upset about like when lines are not perfect. Again, see previous figure of Virgo rising. But I really require. And it's similar. I think this actually goes back to the beginning of what we were talking about with my love of plants as these messengers and stewarded creatures of the planets. Like it's maybe the Taurus in me that I need it to be physical. There's something intimate and like the proximity. There's a delight and an eagerness that I have around like the closeness you can have with the book.
Mm-hmm. It's a tactile thing to have a book and not be on a screen and have backlit light shining in your eye. And then the movement of your hands and then even writing notes. Like I love that idea that you can be ingesting words with your eyes through light and then it goes into your brain or whatever our consciousness is located in our bodies. Some maybe you're reading and it goes into your gut and then it comes out through your nerve endings and you have to sort of replicate it if you're going to copy what you just wrote or respond to it if you're going to add something new. And that entrainment of your body and that physical synapses firing to make your hands and fingers move, that is a different level of reading beyond simply just putting it inside and then staying inert and scrolling past.
Yeah, I've not really been able to read something online and truly take it in. There was someone's dissertation that I really wanted to read and I kept trying to read it online and I kept trying to read it online. And eventually I just had it bound. I needed it to be something I could be with, you know?
Yeah. And also the idea of third house being travel and the idea of traveling through a book as a territory. So, this is the part that's in, if we're going to just pick up Manilius, this is in the first part of the book. So I know I'm going to touch this part. And then, this is in the second or last part and you know where to go. And it's like you're oriented in space with a book and you can't do that with a Kindle or a PDF.
No, I mean, like if what I'm doing is referencing something, I suppose the search feature is helpful, but an index is great.
I know an author who actually decided not to index his second book because he found that with his first book, it made people cheat and not really read what he was trying to share with them. And he didn't want to make it easy.
I like that, actually. I want to know his Saturn placement.
It's probably in Aries. But anyway, so...
Yeah.
Okay, so let's just pivot our way slowly out of this lovely encounter. And I want you to share with me how you would, at this stage in your journey, bring a newer person into the fold of astrological practice.
So the book I always recommend to clients. So a lot of the clients I see are people who are usually like somewhat familiar with their charts to very familiar with their charts, but occasionally I get I know my sun sign and I've never seen a circle chart before person. And when that happens, I'm a cliche. This is also how I got into traditional astrology, actually, but I always recommend Chani's book every single time. And I think part of the reason why is because a lot of them are already on her app, but also the main reason is I think it's a really good primer for like, here's some tenets of astrology without you don't even get into all the planets. So it helps you not get overwhelmed. It's the big three. And it's like, you get a little bit about essential dignity without getting into too much jargon. You get a sense of all the signs. There's a little bit about aspects. It's just enough to not fully overwhelm people and like whet their appetite. Because I think one of the things that can happen straight away with astrology is that you get bit by the bug a little bit, and then you walk into this vast library and think, oh, there's no point. I should just leave. And for some people, it makes sense to not dive in deep and just like see professionals and be good at other things. That's fine. But if you want to learn more, it's really disheartening to see when we're so lucky right now with how many resources there are, but when you're first starting, that many options and how much there is to learn can be so intimidating. And so that's why I like to recommend Chani's book. It's just here's the beginning. If you like this, there's more. And also, I'm always indebted to Chani because it's through her workshops that I even learned what any traditional astrology tenets were, and then found my way to Demetra George, and the rest is history. So lots of gratitude.
Wow. Thank you. All right, everybody, you know what to do next. Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, so where may people find you?
I have a practice called Third Sister. And so my website is third-sister.com. And then I'm on Twitter and Instagram. And whenever you see this, my books are probably open or about to be open. And you can learn about that exact thing and get my writing on plants and planets through my newsletter, which is tinyletter.com/third-sister. So
Wonderful.
I'm sure those links will be in the notes also, so you don't have to worry about typing them out.
They will all be in the show notes, but it's good to hear it.
Yeah. So that's where people can find me.
Wonderful, wonderful. All right. Well, thank you for sharing everything with us today, and see you again.
Okay.
Thank you for listening to Within Orb. To learn more about the Celestial Arts Education Library, or to become a member, visit our website at CAELi.institute. That's www.caeli.institute. If you enjoyed this episode, please help spread the word. Follow or subscribe to Within Orb in your podcatcher of choice, rate it 5 stars, or write us a happy review. This helps others find the show. We also want to give a big thanks to the indie band The E-Block for contributing their song Wake Up for our intro and outro music. You can find them at their website, eblockband.com. This is Jenn Zahrt, signing off for now. See you next time.